Welcome to the Wavy Digital Desk. I'm your host, Sarah Good. Today we're going to be talking about fraud and scams. Now we have FBI Norfolk joining us for this special conversation. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat on Facebook or YouTube, and I can also take a look at them afterwards. There's a link up right now where you can already go to wavy.com and see links to resources on the FBI's website as well as the FTC's website. Just wanted to get started today by introducing our guest that we have here, Special Agent Shannon Newcomb. He's been with FBI Norfolk at least for 16 years, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about his experience and give us some tips in order to keep us safe in the community. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you for
now
having
on
me.
screen. Well, thank you so much for coming in. This has been something that I'm sure that you all get calls about frequently. This is something that we get emails about frequently, and a whole different array of problems people are experiencing. Can we just start by talking about your experience in this sort of field?
So I've had a varied experience in the FBI. One of them being working financial crimes or complex financial fraud. I've been in the FBI for a little over 16 years in Norfolk since about 2017. I've had numerous cases, investment fraud cases, card cracking, credit card fraud, aggravated identity theft, stuff where individuals would steal other people's personally identifiable information in order to essentially steal their money, steal part of their lives, and then the victim, has to then rebuild from that. I mean, it's something that, in many cases, aggravated identity theft has got consequences beyond the consequence, if you want to think about it that way, because now your social security number, your date of birth, your name, you may have open lines of credit you weren't aware of. You may have other things going on. So just to explain my experience, that's been a lot of it. A lot of it, in federal criminal statutes, without getting into too much detail, a lot of it boils down to wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, if there's more than two people or two or more, conspiracy to commit, things like that, among other violations I've worked in the course of my career.
Well, I mean, I hate to put it on a scale, but it seems with identity theft, that sort of can be the worst of it, really, because it's not just your finances, but really who you are as well.
It is a component of it, yes. I mean, everything's terrible. No matter what happens to someone, and just for lack of a better term, fraudster, taking advantage of a situation and ruining someone's life. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the worst of it. It does have consequences after the consequences, where you're kind of having to then identify the fact that you've been victimized. I mean, I think it's even in your tax forms now. Have you been victimized? Have you been the victim of identity theft? So yeah, there's stuff beyond just the actual stealing of money regarding aggravated identity theft. But like anybody who's been victimized, no matter what it is, like they're gonna feel it, and it doesn't feel good.
Absolutely, and you don't know who is on the other side, whether it's the phone, email, or I guess texting now, or apps.
Mm-hmm. Fraud is fraud. It can be delivered in a lot of different methodologies. So specifically, prime example, text messages. Hey, maybe you got a text message from your social media company, one of your many social media apps, and they're like, you've been compromised, click this link. Whatever you do, don't do that. You're getting an unsolicited text from someone you don't know, and if you take that moment and look at it, you may say like, wait a minute, this is coming from an email account that's not even affiliated with this. Let me unpack this, or go into your social media and see if something's going on. Maybe file a report that way. Or for example, I love the ones where you might get a streaming service, essentially like, oh, your Netflix account is, for lack of a better term, and many other streaming services, has been compromised. And you're like, oh, click this link. Don't do it. It's an unsolicited contact, emails, phone numbers. I always tell people too, like, everybody wants to be polite on the phone. We try. Everybody tries to be very polite. It's okay not to be polite. Sometimes people are trying to steal your money when they call you unsolicitedly, and being rude is okay. So I always tell everybody when I talk to them, when I go talk to people out in the community and things like that, like if you get an unsolicited phone call and this person is selling you something or telling you, oh my God, you've been victimized, maybe someone was impersonating a government official in law enforcement, and they tell you, oh my God, your grandchild is now in jail and we need you to post bond. And oh my God, your poor grandchild, your emotions are super high, your anxiety is super high, your reasoning is super low. No one in law enforcement is going to ask you for money specifically to go to any store to buy gift cards and give them the gift cards over the phone. So it's having that moment of pause. to really think about what's going on.
And that moment of pause is interesting too, because it seems that people are being, contacted in ways that are familiar to them, whether it's a UPS tracking number, your example of, a streaming service. There's so many different ways that it connects with your life that it does make you think, oh, did I miss a bill? Did I miss a payment? And it's such an easy thing that gets under people's skin.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Everybody wants to make sure their bills are paid. Everybody wants to make sure they're on top of things, but life happens and we don't know, and you have that moment of, wait a minute, did I do this or not? So then you immediately, well, let me check, let me click on that. Let me go into that email. And I always tell everybody, look where the email comes from. Sometimes the clue is right in the person sending the email. It looks kind of like the email that you should be getting from that company, but it's not quite there. There's a letter out of place, or it's from an email account, like any of the million email accounts you have your normal personal emails through, and you're like, wait a minute, why is this person sending, let's just use an example from Gmail. Why am I getting an email from Gmail for this company? They have their own company email. That's a moment of pause. And really kind of analyzing the situation. I always tell everybody to stop what you're doing. If you get a call and you pick it up, and the next thing you know, it's going too far. And again, your reasoning's low, your anxiety's high, you're stressed out. If it's impersonating a government official, maybe you have something where you were told you are now the sole beneficiary from an inheritance from a person you have no idea was a relative, and you got to pay all this money up front and to get that money, or what have you. Is take a moment, and with phones, I always say this: hang up. Phones drop calls all the time. Batteries run out all the time. If they're trying to push you in a situation and all of a sudden you feel like internally your anxiety is up, hang up. Don't answer the call. Take a moment. With regarding the previous example of the grandchild who's been arrested, call your grandchild. Are you in jail right now? Their answer's gonna be like, no, I'm at college. What are you talking about? Or call their parents like, did you know this? Or like, no. That moment of pause. Get some distance. Instead of having a situation right in front of your face where you're not thinking, your anxiety is high, you're super stressed out, your reasoning is super low, get some pause, get some distance, take a deep breath, and think, does this make sense? Because fraudsters are preying on your inability to reason.
And with that too, the callback, if you needed to, whether it is a real person or whether you're getting a call on your phone and it has a dial back number, sometimes I guess you could see if that dialed back number is even real or even to the person that's calling you.
So let's just say, for example, impersonating a government official. You can spoof numbers. Numbers spoofed, outgoing numbers. So the fraudster makes a call to you, they can spoof that number to make it look like that is you're actually getting a phone call, let's just say from the FBI. But if you call that number back, the actual FBI number, you get the actual FBI. So doing the homework, kind of like hanging up the phone, breaking contact, getting distance. In football, putting the forearm out, stopping getting tackled, getting distance away from it. Then, okay, let me do some research. Let me get on Google. Let me get on this. Let me do some, was this number is real? Great. Well, instead of waiting for them to call you back, call that number and say, hey, I just received a phone call that I have an arrest warrant out in my name, which we're not going to call you about that. And I need to pay money. And we're like, let me get you in touch with an agent. Let's talk through this, so on and so forth.
It's hard to imagine, and we've all gotten those calls. Now, of course, some phones actually give you the scam warning or the spam warning to make sure that you're not picking up. But at the same rate, your best defense, even if it's not answering the phone, they're going to target you in some other way, it seems. I did want to ask, too, about, there are other types of scams as well that you all get calls about. So in terms of fraud, you get impersonation. Romance scams are the number 2 for you all, which surprised me, but we've talked a lot about it.
So when I ran Virginia numbers through the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is an FBI website, because some people are confused by that. Sometimes like, oh, this needs to be filed with the FBI's IC3.gov. That's the Internet Crime Complaint Center. It's an FBI website regarding financial fraud. When I ran the numbers through IC3 just for our area, the number one was investment fraud, number two was cryptocurrency.
Interesting.
But romance scam was in the top 10.
Okay.
So we do see a lot of that, and unfortunately, those happen several different ways. Maybe, and some people like to say, well, that's something that happens to older people who have been widowed, widower, you know, and that's not the case. It can happen to anybody. Maybe you're on a dating app, and all of a sudden you seem to be hitting it off with a very attractive male, female, whomever, and you know, you think things are going great. Maybe they live overseas. Maybe they live across the country. And then they're like, hey, could you send me money for a plane ticket? I'd like to come and see you. And you're immediately like, this person's great. I'm hitting it off. I can't wait. You could be in your 20s. You could be in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It doesn't. There's no real age discrimination on that. It's across the board. It's how fraudsters manipulate people, and they're good at it. They're trying to pull on your emotions and what you're doing. I would say, like, hey, if this person does exist and you are hitting it off, then the response would be like, you know what, that sounds great. I actually have some vacation time I'm looking to burn. Let me buy a ticket to come see you. And I guarantee you, if that person exists, they're gonna be like, great, awesome, let's make it happen. If they don't exist, they're gonna give you every excuse in the book why that's a bad idea, because they just want the money.
And I think with all of this, it's interesting, you know, the fraudsters are skilled at this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that you've echoed throughout this conversation is they are skilled at this. So it kind of takes you to have that second of breath and then also sort of it seems like some digging or some sort of questions back to sort of prove them wrong or prove that it's fake.
Right. Prime example, sometimes the FBI calls people to do interviews over the phone. And I can tell you I've done so many. And almost always are like, oh, yeah, you're lying to me, or this is, you know, so on and so forth. And I'm like, okay, great. You know what? Don't believe me. That's great. Here's what I recommend you do. Go to fbi.gov, go to contact us. There's a little map there, and it says Norfolk. Click there. Look up the phone number. Call me back. And when you call back, you're going to get our ops center, and you're going to talk to somebody there and ask for Special Agent Newcomb. And almost always, like, I had a few people say, okay, great, I'm going to do that. And I'm glad they do. That's the way I would do that. If somebody called me, I'd be like, hold on. And because the person who wants to keep you on the phone is probably the fraudster. The person who's willing to let it go
You're right.
is probably legitimate. I don't want to say, I never like to make blanket statements, but the person's like, well, you need to talk to me. Like, do I? Or can I call you back?
These are some tips. I feel like these are insider knowledge here. But it is interesting because it's that subtle difference of them being maybe more hostile on the phone or hostile over some app or message that sort of makes the difference. The top ones are being more financial, so investment. Are those companies that you're trying to invest in that don't exist? Is it working with a broker that actually isn't doing anything for you? I mean, what's an instance of that?
Well, I always say do your homework. If you're going to invest in anything, just do your homework. Is the person certified? Do they have are they with a brokerage or this? I mean, there's a million different ways to invest. But I always say do your homework. If they're trying to give you the hard sell and saying that you have to do it and you got to jump on this because you're going to miss out on this amazing opportunity, or the fact like you're going to get a 25% return, I'm like, really?
Maybe be skeptical.
Like be a little skeptical of that. Like, that is a pretty solid return. And the market fluctuates constantly, and you're telling me that you can guarantee that I'm going to get a 25% return. That should be a little like, okay, all right, well, show me some numbers. Well, I don't have them here, or somebody who's maybe not certified, or there's no history on them, or so on and so forth, and asking them those questions. Well, like, hey, what brokerage you're with, were you certified, so on and so forth. Is asking follow-up questions, question and verify. I always like to say it's not so much. Unfortunately, everybody's probably going to run into this through the course of their lifetime of being, almost being a victim of fraud, almost. It's not so much, you can't avoid it, it's making yourself a harder target. Is really like, make it so difficult for the fraudster that they just, you're too difficult to deal with. I also want to caveat something here too, because sometimes it's human nature to get angry and want to respond to a text message or an email and be like, you're a fraudster, blah, blah, blah. Don't do that. Just break contact. It's like sometimes people will, open it, like I can say this, even certain family members, well, I'm going to send that person, I'm going to send them a terse text message or email or so on and so forth. Don't do that. Like, it could be like a robo-text or a robo-email, essentially just sent out, and they're just looking for hits. They're looking to see who responds. Don't respond.
I know, I've seen videos, whether it's on social media or even there's been some news reports on it where people engaged with the fraudster going back and forth. And I know it's funny and maybe it gets, some clicks or, you can see where they're struggling in that dynamic, but that is giving them additional ammo or connection, right? Or
it's just, putting yourself in an unnecessary situation is the way I would phrase it, is essentially speaking that this person has reached out to you, they're a fraudster, and you know it's a fraud and whatever, and the next thing you do, you're like, okay, fine, great, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to text them, and I'm going to get in their face, whatever. Well, all you're doing is confirming that's a good number.
Right.
And next thing you know, your phone's ringing, you're getting emails, you're getting more text messages, and then it's just an annoyance.
And I want to talk about, too, and we're almost out of time, so just 2 more questions, but the advancement of these sort of scams that exist, especially now in the world of, social media and the web, there's just so many ways for people to get in touch with you, but then there's also AI and there's ways to impersonate voices, and it just seems like maybe it's more accessible, the world now, for fraudsters. I mean, are you all seeing this big change or evolution of them becoming more advanced?
Fraudsters are opportunistic. So if there's something out there they can use, spoofing numbers, changing voices, if it's out there and it's accessible, there's a good chance it's going to get used. It's having, and I always say everybody this, is distance, pause, breathe, think. Getting distance from the fraudster, taking a pause, breathing it out, taking time to think, like, is this legitimate? And like I always said, go back to the one thing I said in the beginning about the grandchild being, in jail and them you need to post bail and stuff. Like, number one, no one in law enforcement is ever going to ask you to pay money to post bail of something from a grandchild who's, let's just say, in another state, and you're here 5, 6 states away. Is distance, pause, breathe, really reason it out. Like, now this doesn't make sense.
I feel like I have had it easier than some because my last name is Good, but I'll get, Goody or Good or whatever it is. And so it's been an immediate red flag for me. So it's, at least in terms of voice calls, it served me well. But I have gotten a call once that said, they knew my brother's name, my father's name. They really can find all this information for you nowadays, also on the web, especially if you have a social media trail. I mean, how important is that to keep that clean?
It's very important.
Yeah.
Be careful what you share online. Truly. Sometimes people are overshare or they have things out there, and they keep it simple. Like, people may be wishing you a happy birthday because your birthday's out there and so on and so forth, but is there another website where you have like a partial address? Do you have an old address? Do you have your maiden name or married name? Or if you leave enough breadcrumbs, eventually they're going to find it. Because, like, to go back to what I said regarding the spoofing calls and your mention of the AI and voice changing stuff like that, is that fraudsters are opportunistic, so they're going to look for it, and they're going to see what they can do. But they're also, at the same time, fraudsters, this is a business for them. So if you make yourself a harder target, they have other things they're going to do.
And then last thing, just in terms of keeping people safe, especially maybe in the banking front or the online apps or some of these mobile devices, what kind of tips, I guess, should people look at? Is it, the 2-factor ID? Is it making, extreme passwords? Are there certain things that people can use to sort of add an extra layer of protection?
Absolutely. And also check with your financial institutions. Two-factor authentication is great. Strong passwords is great. Anything can be manipulated to a certain degree, but obviously, and if you don't know, or let's say you are elderly, talk to a child, talk to a grandchild who is more computer savvy and like, I need help. How do I do this? The other thing we didn't talk about too, especially if you feel like your accounts have been manipulated or your ID's been used, is running a credit check through one of the 3 credit bureaus, annually, to say like, hey, what lines of credit do I have open? Are these lines of credit that I actually have, or are they not? And then dealing with that situation. You can also freeze your credit. I always warn people, though, if you're going to freeze your credit and you're going to go buy a car, or maybe you sold your house and you're buying a house, you may want to unfreeze it because you're not going to get, they're going to be like denied.
Make that note. Yeah.
Make that note. But all of those things are great things you do. Check your bank statements more than monthly. I know some people are back in the old school, like they get the monthly statement and they pull out the checkbook and they're going through it. I mean, I was that way 20 years ago. So I'm not that way anymore. Like it's, once or twice a week or more. It's just taking the time to make yourself a harder target, taking the time to make sure that everything that is your own, and also what you said about passwords and authentication and having your bank get to know you.
Well, thank you so much, Shannon. I know that we just scratched the surface really of some of this stuff, but I think the tips that you shared are so helpful just to give people time to breathe. Don't feel bad being rude on the phone and sort of either hanging up or, contacting someone a different way. And I think be skeptical sort of throughout this whole conversation is the biggest takeaway, really. Don't assume the person that maybe is an authoritative figure, whether they're impersonating someone, has all the information. Just take a second and sort of think about it, contact your loved ones. I mean, is there anything, last tip, that you want to share with people just sort of moving forward as sort of these schemes get even more advanced?
Question and verify. That's the best thing, to question and verify. And what I said before without going over it again is that if you feel like something, if the hairs on the back of your neck are going up, if you feel like something is just not right, break contact. Break contact, get the right answer.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone tuning in. There's even more information, and I'll put more information there following this conversation on wavy.com. FBI Norfolk is also linked, so you can go to their Facebook page and their social media pages to stay up to date. And I know that there are also ways to report through FBI Norfolk as well as your closest field office. So all of that is also linked on wavy.com. Thanks so much for joining us.